Well, good morning. This is day 2 of our devotional that we have prepared called Old Testament Truths to Live By. I love the Old Testament, as I told you yesterday. And today we're going to go to the book of Judges. It is so full of all types of war stories about God's chosen people. And he also says in there that as they ventured into the promised land and began to take the land that God had given them, you know what? They had battles they had to incur. And this is important for us to know all by itself, that in the conquering of our promises of God and in conquering our place, which is heaven one day, we're going to have some battles too. And today we're going to learn about a unique battle that involves a woman who was leading the nation of Israel. Even though the Israelites were God's chosen people, they lived in a very toxic, ongoing sin cycle. They had turned from God, then they would worship idols, then they'd be oppressed, then they'd cry out to God, and then God would save them. And once God saved them from their danger, then they would turn from Him again. And then they would go back into idols. And it was the same cycle. It may be a different year, but it was the same cycle. Does this sound familiar to you today? This is an important lesson for us to grasp today. Stay in a position of keeping God first always, in the good times and in the seemingly bad times. It's important for us to know that God needs to be in charge of every one of our days so that we aren't forced into a place of where we are going around in circles. Judges 4 begins by stating that the Israelites had been oppressed by the Canaanites for 20 years. At that time, Deborah was the judge that was leading Israel at this time. Now, being a judge in that day was different from the judge of being in today. This judge was really like the president of the country of Israel. She ruled Israel. She called for a man when she felt inspired that they needed to go in battle. She called for a man named Barak, and told him to take with him 10,000 men with him to Mount Tabor, and that she would see the deliverance of Sisera, who was the commander of the Canaanite army, and that God was going to give him into his hands. And you know Barak's response to her? If you will go with me, I will go. But if you don't go with me, I won't go. That's found in Judges 4 and verse 8. Out of the New International Version. And so, to make a long story short, Deborah told him, sure, I'll go with you, and I will be there at the battle with you. But know this, if I do, you will not get the glory for what is done by God that day. It said that Barak and Deborah went into this battle and was victorious against the Canaanites. Barak, he showed strength and he showed leadership. He fought in the battle. And Deborah showed a faith and a fierceness that was unrivaled. She stood there in the middle of the battle and believed. And then there is this little woman named Jael, the woman who actually killed the commander of the Canaanite army, just as Deborah prophesied unto Barak, you will not get the victory. It'll come through the hands of a woman. And we find, though, as we read that story, what a great victory it is. And you really need to read it. It's more than one chapter long. But in it, we see that God is faithful to the woman, to the man, and to the servant woman. We also find, and this is where the story takes us today, we find over in Hebrews 11, the chapter that is called the Hall of Faith. And those who by example have shown us great exploits of faith to overcome various types of circumstances. And you read in Hebrews 11 and verse 32, this particular statement. And what more shall I say? For the time would fail me to tell of Gideon and Barak and Samson and Jephthah, also of David and Samuel and the prophets, who through faith subdued kingdoms, worked righteousness, obtained promises, stopped the mouths of lions. I want you to see, in the same sentence as some amazing warriors and people of faith, there stands Barak, the man who was so afraid to go into battle when his leader told him that he needed to do so. His response was, I'll go, but I won't go without you going with me, Deborah. And she had to go with him to back him up. The faith here came from Deborah, yet she isn't mentioned anywhere in the Hall of Faith in Hebrews 11. And so some of us would say, oh, that's not fair. But I think God's giving us something here that we need to take in today. Number one, even leaders get afraid. People assume that leaders are never fearful and always full of faith. But this isn't always the case. God commanded Barak to lead the army, but he was fearful. And this led him to practically beg Deborah to go with him. Just because someone is a leader doesn't mean they don't have fears in their battles. However, walking into the battle or a situation often builds faith and turns weakness into strength. Barak was victorious that day. Deborah was victorious that day. Jael was victorious that day. Point number 2, you never know who's behind someone's success. We often see leaders and we think the work they do is amazing. But good leaders, I mean really good leaders, will always tell you, it's not me. I may be the one you see, but it's this person or this person or this person or this person or this group or this team that's behind them. They are the ones that make me look successful. I want you to know today, in the difficult times, there is always somebody behind those leaders saying, come on, we can do this. And if you're a leader today, point 3 is this. Acknowledge and be thankful for the Deborahs and the Jaels in your life. Be thankful for your behind-the-scenes generals, because without them, you could not win the battle. So today, child of God, when you get up and you go about your day, there's a general behind you. His name is Jesus Christ. Go with him today.